Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to tackle something a little out there, the Flat Earth movement.
Okay.
But
Sounds interesting.
we're not here to argue about, whether the Earth is actually flat or not.
Right.
Instead, we're going to use this kind of unusual idea to explore something a lot bigger.
I like it.
How we all talk about science and, just knowledge in general
Yeah.
and how much we can trust the information that's out there.
That's a big one.
It is. It's a really big one.
Especially these days.
Exactly.
With all the stuff online, it's
yeah.
really hard to know what to trust.
It really is.
Yeah.
So to help guide our deep dive today,
Okay.
we're going to be looking at this fascinating research paper.
Cool.
It analyzes videos and interviews from Brazil's first ever Flat Earth conference,
Wow.
FlatCon.
Yeah.
So we're going right to the source.
Love it.
We're hearing from the flat earthers themselves.
Mm-hmm.
The researchers actually call them denialists.
Denialists.
And-
Makes sense.
We'll also hear from the people who are debunking those flat earth claims.
Right.
The researchers call them affirmationists.
Affirmationists.
Now,
God.
what's really interesting is that the researchers,
Yeah.
they found that both sides,
Mm-hmm.
even though they have completely opposite conclusions,
Right.
they share a very similar approach to science. And they call it
Interesting.
Esperantist-Epideictic.
Esperantist-Epideictic.
Right. Now, I know that might sound like a mouthful,
A little bit.
but stick with us
Okay.
because it's a concept that I think we're going to find
I'm sure.
really relatable.
Yeah.
So let's start unpacking this Esperantist-Epideictic framework,
Okay.
and we'll begin with the Esperantist part,
All right.
which basically means both sides treat science like it's a quest for absolute
Mm-hmm.
objective truth,
Yeah.
like a universal language that we can all agree on,
Right.
as long as we all look at the evidence correctly.
I see where this is going. So it gets a bit tricky here
Yeah,
because, we want to be objective in
Right.
science,
of course.
but it's not as simple as just observing and experimenting.
Right.
There's more to it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in these flat Earth discussions,
Yeah.
the researchers found some great examples of this Esperantist view.
Okay.
For example,
Give me one.
one of the flat earthers,
Okay.
we'll call him denialist D1.
D1.
Yeah, he argued that because
Okay.
mathematics is the absolute truth.
Okay.
We can use math to make curvature tests and prove the Earth is flat.
Interesting how they bring in math there,
Right.
using the certainty of math
Yeah.
to support that claim.
Exactly.
So if you disagree,
Right.
you're disagreeing with math itself.
Right. And then on the other side,
The affirmationists.
yeah,
Okay.
they obviously disagree about the shape of the Earth,
Of course.
but they also rely on this idea of absolute truth that comes from experiments. So one of the YouTube science communicators,
Mm-hmm.
affirmationist A2,
Okay.
he emphasized that the absolute truth is taken from experiments and not from interpretations.
Interesting.
And, he said, you have to do an experiment.
So both sides are really emphasizing
Yeah.
this idea of like a single truth that science reveals.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah.
And that idea, it sounds really appealing.
Yeah. A clear-cut answer
Yeah.
makes things simple.
Right.
But the reality is science is messy.
Yeah.
It's not always about finding a single truth.
Exactly.
It's about probabilities and interpretations, and
Right.
things are always evolving.
Yeah. And that's why it's so interesting
Yeah.
to see how this Esperantist view plays out, even when people are defending
Okay.
what we would normally consider good science.
So it shows us
Yeah.
that how we talk about science
Mm.
can actually make it seem simpler
Yeah.
than it really is,
Exactly.
hiding all the complexity.
Right.
Yeah.
Now,
Okay.
another part of this Esperantist puzzle
Okay.
is the use of scientific-sounding language.
Oh, so like using jargon
Yes,
to sound smart.
exactly.
Right.
Like to sound more authoritative.
We see this all the time,
Yeah.
not just in science.
Oh, yeah.
Anytime someone wants to sound like an expert.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, for example, one of the affirmationists,
Mm-hmm.
affirmationist A3,
Okay.
he was talking about satellite imagery,
Yeah.
and he kept saying scientific methodology,
Okay.
but he didn't actually explain what that meant.
So just throwing around the words to make it seem like there's no more room for discussion.
Exactly.
Interesting.
And then on the other side,
Okay.
we see the denialists doing something similar,
Okay.
using complex terminology,
Oh.
sometimes even misusing it.
To try and sound more credible.
Exactly.
Right.
Like one of them claimed to use
Okay.
neuro-linguistic programming.
What?
NLP,
NLP.
as a scientific methodology to explain how language influences people.
Wow.
But there was no real explanation of
Right.
what NLP even is.
Or how it's actually a scientific method. It's
Yeah.
like both sides are using jargon to avoid actually having to explain themselves.
Right. Like they're using it as a shield
Yeah.
to avoid criticism.
Avoid explaining things in simple terms.
Exactly.
Interesting tactic.
Okay, so we've got this focus on absolute truth.
Yep.
And then this tendency to rely on,
Jargon.
yes, scientific sounding language.
Right.
And then the final piece of this Esperantist approach is the focus on objectivity.
Oh, so now both sides are going to claim to be totally objective,
You got it.
even though they have totally opposite views.
Exactly.
So probably.
It's actually kind of funny
Okay.
how often this comes up.
Let's hear it.
So denialist D2,
Okay.
he said,
Yeah.
it's not a matter of believing or having faith. It's a matter of knowing the reality.
So like there's just one reality and everyone should just see it.
Yes. And then, as you might expect, the affirmationists say something similar.
Of course.
Affirmationist A1
Yep.
argued that
Okay.
science doesn't have sex, it doesn't have religion, it doesn't have a race,
Wow.
trying to imply that science is completely neutral.
Totally unbiased.
Yes.
Not
Yeah.
affected by any human factors,
Right.
which is,
So
I
gotten
mean,
a little idealized.
yeah, we want objectivity in science.
Oh, of course.
But we have to acknowledge
Yeah.
that scientists are humans,
Right.
and humans have biases,
Yeah.
and those biases can affect research.
Of course.
Okay.
So that brings us to the second half of this framework,
All right.
the epideictic aspect.
Epideictic. So this is where things get a little more rhetorical.
Exactly.
Interesting.
So the researchers found that both sides do a lot of praising their own side and blaming the other side.
Us versus them.
Classic.
It's so common
It is.
in these debates. It's like the goal is just to win
Yes.
and not to actually understand
Exactly.
the other side.
So, for example,
Yeah.
one of the affirmationists
Okay.
criticized the flat earthers because they charge for their courses.
Oh, yeah.
And he was like, we provide free science education.
So they're the good guys.
Right.
Altruistic.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then one of the flat earthers on the other side,
Mm-hmm.
he compared science to
Oh, no.
the pre-Reformation Catholic Church.
Wow.
And he suggested that they both demand blind faith in authority figures.
So they're the rebels.
Yeah.
Fighting against the establishment.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that kind of rhetoric can be really powerful.
Especially these days
Yeah.
where people don't trust institutions.
Exactly.
Makes sense.
But the interesting finding
Okay.
about this epideic element
Okay.
is the fact that the affirmationists
Mm-hmm.
really didn't want to debate the flat earthers.
Oh, so they were avoiding the debate?
Yeah, they gave a bunch of different reasons.
But that probably looked suspicious to
Yeah,
the flat
yeah.
earthers.
Yeah.
Like they were hiding something.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
It is.
Because on the one hand,
Right.
you don't want to give a platform to misinformation,
Of course.
but refusing to engage
Uh-huh.
can actually make things worse. Makes it seem like you're afraid to debate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is where I think this whole Esperantist-Epideictic approach, it can really backfire.
In what way?
Because by holding on to this idea of science
Right.
as this perfect source of truth,
Okay.
any challenge to that truth,
Yeah.
it becomes a threat.
Something to avoid
Yeah,
instead of engaging with.
exactly.
Right.
And I think that avoidance can actually make the problem even worse.
Yeah, it just digs people in deeper.
Exactly.
And pushes the two sides further apart.
Right.
So we've laid out this Esperantist-Epideictic framework.
Yeah.
It's clear both sides are using it, even though they have completely opposite conclusions.
Right.
But you might be thinking,
Yeah.
so what?
Yeah. Why does this matter to me?
Why does any of this matter to me?
Right.
That's the key question.
It is.
And that's what we're going to explore next.
Yeah.
Because this approach,
Yeah.
it's not just about flat Earth.
Right.
This is about how we talk about science and knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And we see it everywhere.
We do.
Yeah.
So we've got this Esperantist-Epideictic framework,
Right.
this seeking absolute truth,
Yeah.
and then using rhetoric to praise your side
Mm-hmm.
and blame the other side.
Right.
But, like, how does that play out in the real world?
That's the important thing here.
Yeah.
This isn't just about a small group.
Right.
This Esperantist-Epideictic approach,
Yeah.
it shows up in tons of debates,
Okay.
especially when we're talking about science.
Uh-huh.
That has real consequences.
Okay, so we're talking about, like,
Think about things like vaccines.
okay.
climate change,
Mm-hmm.
genetically modified foods,
Right.
even just debates about diet and nutrition,
Yeah.
all these areas where people are really dug in,
Yeah.
claiming they have the absolute truth,
Right.
and they use all this jargon and cherry-picked data.
Right. It's like everyone's an expert now.
Exactly.
Everyone's got their studies,
Yeah.
their talking points.
Right.
They're like airtight arguments.
And that's the problem.
Yeah.
Because when we approach these issues with
Mhm.
this like black and white thinking,
Right.
my truth versus your truth,
Uh-huh.
it just shuts down any chance of having a real conversation.
Yeah, it's like we're so focused on winning
Right.
that we don't even listen to each other.
Exactly.
And then everyone just gets more polarized.
Uh,
Instead of trying to understand each other,
Right.
we just end up further apart.
And more entrenched in our own positions.
Yeah. And the researchers actually say that.
What's that?
This Esperantist-Epideictic approach,
Okay.
even when it's used to defend good science,
Mm-hmm.
it might actually make people more susceptible to denialism,
Oh,
misinformation.
that's interesting.
Right.
So
Yeah.
when we present science
Yeah.
as this source of absolute truth,
Mm.
any challenge
Yeah.
feels like an attack on the whole system.
It makes people defensive.
Right.
Like, if they're wrong about this one thing,
Yeah.
does that mean everything they believe is wrong?
Exactly.
So they just double down
Yeah.
instead of being open to nuance.
Or uncertainty,
Right.
or the fact that they might be wrong.
They just retreat into their echo chamber where everything they see
Yeah.
just confirms what they already believe.
This is making me think about
Oh, yeah.
that part of the research where
Yeah.
the affirmationists
Yeah.
didn't want to debate the flat earthers.
Right.
Their instinct was to just ignore them,
Yeah.
not even give them a platform.
Right.
But the researchers say that
Mhm.
might actually backfire.
Right. Because ignoring something doesn't make it go away.
Yes, exactly. And it can actually make it seem like
Right.
you're afraid of the debate.
Or hiding something,
Yeah.
which can make people even more suspicious.
Totally.
It feeds into that us versus them thing.
Exactly.
So it's like,
Yeah.
how do we get out of this cycle?
Right. How do we have better conversations about science?
Especially when we disagree.
Exactly. And that's what I'm hoping we can figure out today,
Yeah.
because it seems like this is everywhere.
It's way of thinking.
Yeah, this Esperantist-Epideictic approach.
It is.
It's in our news feeds, our
Uh-huh.
social media,
Yeah.
even just like conversations with our friends and family.
That's how we communicate now.
Yeah.
Especially with so much information out there.
So much information.
Yeah.
Overwhelming.
So I think
Yeah.
the first step is just to be aware of it,
To be aware.
of these patterns.
Right.
These ways that we argue.
Okay.
These rhetorical traps that we fall into.
Like,
Yeah.
when we see someone,
Using a bunch of jargon
right,
without explaining it,
or claiming to have the absolute truth,
Yeah.
that's a red flag.
like a sign that they're more interested in winning
Yeah.
than actually having a conversation.
Right.
And remember,
Yeah.
this goes for information that
Mhm.
you agree with
Right.
just as much as stuff that you disagree with.
Don't just accept something
Right.
because it fits with what you already believe.
Exactly.
It's so easy to do that.
It is. We all do it,
Yeah, confirmation bias.
right? We just look for stuff that supports our views.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we have to make an effort to consider other viewpoints,
Okay.
read different sources,
hmm
listen to different people,
Yeah.
talk to people who disagree with you.
Get out of our echo chambers.
Exactly.
Like stepping outside of our comfort zones
Right.
and being open to learning something new.
Even if it means
Yeah.
changing your mind about something.
And that's where humility comes in.
Because we have to recognize
Yeah.
that we don't have all the answers.
That we might be wrong.
Yeah.
That's key to being able to learn and grow.
So it's like
Yeah.
approaching these conversations with curiosity
Right.
instead of the need to be right.
Exactly.
Ask questions.
Listen to understand.
Mhm.
And be okay with saying,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Which is hard,
It is.
especially these days.
Yeah, everyone's got an opinion about everything.
Right.
But it's worth it.
In what way?
Because when we let go of the need to be right,
Mm-hmm.
we open ourselves up to so much more,
Okay,
more
wait.
meaningful conversations,
Yeah.
stronger relationships, even
Yeah.
just making better decisions.
This has been so helpful, this whole conversation.
Yeah.
About,
It all started with flat Earth,
right,
but we ended up talking about so much more.
the nature of knowledge, the
Mhm.
importance of critical thinking,
Right.
humility.
Yeah.
It's like even the craziest ideas
Can teach us something.
about ourselves.
About the world.
Exactly.
So I'm wondering, how do we actually put all of this into practice?
That's a great question.
Yeah. How do we take these ideas
Uh-huh.
and actually use them in our daily lives?
We'll explore that next.
All right, so we've been talking about this Esperantist-Epideictic framework,
Right.
this way of thinking about science that shows up
Yeah.
in the flat earth debate.
Mhm.
And even though it seems like it's about finding the truth,
Yeah.
it can actually make it harder to have good conversations.
Right. It can make people less willing to change their minds.
Totally.
Yeah.
So we've talked about some potential solutions, like
Yeah.
being aware of these rhetorical patterns,
Yeah.
healthy skepticism,
Mm-hmm.
seeking out different perspectives,
Right.
and embracing humility.
Humility.
But, like, how do we actually put those ideas into practice?
It starts with small things.
Okay.
Like the next time you're reading a news article or something.
Or scrolling through social media,
Mm-hmm.
just take a second and ask yourself, what
Yeah.
kind of language are they using?
Okay.
Are they appealing to emotion or logic?
Mm-hmm.
Are they giving you both sides of the story?
Right. So it's like
Yeah.
putting on our critical thinking caps
Exactly.
before we even start forming an opinion.
Yeah, and remember,
Sure.
this goes for information you agree with, too.
Right.
Not just stuff you disagree with.
Yeah. Don't just accept something at face value
Mhm.
just because it supports what you already think.
Right.
It's easy to fall into that trap.
Yeah.
Confirmation bias.
Mm-hmm.
We all do it.
So we need to make a conscious effort
Okay.
to consider other viewpoints, read articles from different sources,
Right.
listen to podcasts with guests
Let's
who have different perspectives,
Yeah.
talk to people who disagree with you.
get out of our echo chambers. Step outside our comfort zones,
Yeah, and be open to learning something new.
even if it means
Right.
changing our minds about something.
Exactly.
And that brings us back to humility,
Yeah. Humility is key.
because we have to admit that we don't know everything.
That we might be wrong.
Right.
And that's how
Right.
we can learn and grow.
It's like coming to the conversation with curiosity
Right.
instead of the need to always be right.
Exactly.
Asking questions,
Yeah.
really listening,
Mm.
and being okay with saying,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Which can be tough.
It can,
Everyone wants to have an opinion.
especially these days.
Yeah.
It-
But it's worth it.
How so?
Because when we can let go of that need to be right,
Yeah.
it opens us up to so much more.
Okay, like what?
Like better conversations,
Oh, wait.
stronger relationships,
Mhm.
better decisions.
Was so much good stuff.
Good.
Yeah, this whole conversation has been really eye-opening.
I'm glad.
We started with flat Earth,
Huh.
but we ended up talking about so much more.
The nature of knowledge,
Yeah.
critical thinking, humility.
Yeah.
It shows you
Yeah.
that even the craziest ideas
Right.
can teach us something valuable
About ourselves.
about the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So to all of our listeners out there,
Yeah.
the next time you're in like a heated discussion or something,
Mm-hmm.
just take a second
Okay.
to pause.
Breathe.
Yeah.
And remember what we've talked about today.
Challenge those old ways of thinking.
Yeah.
Embrace being uncomfortable.
Right?
And come to the conversation
Yeah.
with curiosity,
Mhm.
skepticism,
And an open mind.
because it's not about winning.
It's about understanding.
That's a perfect way to end it.
I think so.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Always a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.
Until then, keep questioning
Keep learning.
and keep diving deep.